On the night the chandeliers of Victoria Island glittered like captive stars, Amara learned what it meant to be invisible in her own marriage. Laughter clinked against crystal as Kola, the man she once prayed for, raised a cruel toast that sliced through her like a blade. A billionaire must look the part, he smirked, while eyes circled her body as if it were a public joke. Amara said nothing. But in her silence, something ancient stirred, an ember passed down from mothers who survived storms and sang anyway. The next morning, while Lagos woke to restless traffic and sea salt wind, she laced her shoes, whispered a Yoruba proverb, Igi gogoro magun mi shugbon emio ni subu. The tall tree may loom, but I will not fall, and began a quiet revolution. This is a story about dignity found, respect demanded, and a man who mistook softness for weakness until consequences knocked. Before we dive in, tell me your city and your local time in the comments, and if powerful moral African stories are your thing, gently tap subscribe so you won't miss the next chapter. The mansion on Victoria Island glittered from the outside like a monument of triumph, a place where wealth sang from every chandelier and marble floor. Yet inside, the air often felt colder than the sea breeze that swept across Lagos at dawn. Kola, a billionaire, whose empire stretched from oil contracts to tech ventures, carried himself with the arrogance of a king who believed even time would bow to him. He had the world's admiration, the city's envy, and the kind of friends who measured loyalty in cocktails and business deals. But behind closed doors, Amara, his wife of 8 years, was suffocating. She had been with him long before the limelight, back when he had nothing but a single idea and boundless ambition. She had sat with him in candlelit nights when the generator failed, encouraged him when investors laughed in his face, prayed with him when his ventures collapsed. She had carried his burdens quietly, believing love was sacrifice. Her reward, however, was mockery. Over the years, Amara's body had softened. Health struggles and the weight of loneliness had shaped her curves. Yet she remained graceful, her voice soothing, her eyes still the same wells of kindness that had once drawn him in. But Kola, blinded by media images of lean models and polished actresses, saw only what he called a flaw. He no longer saw the woman who had steadied him through storms. He saw only the shadows of his own ego. It began with subtle remarks, "You should watch what you eat," or "That dress doesn't flatter you." Then the comments sharpened into daggers. "You're embarrassing me in front of my colleagues. Look at you wasting away in laziness." Each insult landed like a whip, but Amara, strong in her silence, bore it without tears in public. Only in the quiet of her bedroom did she press her palms against her chest to keep it from breaking. One evening, as rain lashed against the glass walls of their mansion, Kola entertained 2 of his friends, Tunde and Oba, men who worshipped his wealth as though it were a god. Laughter filled the room, the scent of expensive whiskey rising like smoke. Then, as Amara entered with a tray of suya and chilled drinks, Kola's gaze swept her from head to toe. He raised his brows dramatically and said with a sneer, "This is what you call improvement. My wife thinks she's getting healthier, but look at her still carrying the weight of a whole village." The laughter that followed echoed louder than the thunder outside. Tunde and Oba chuckled uncomfortably, not daring to challenge their host. Amara felt her face flush hot, her eyes sting. She swallowed the tears before they could betray her, and simply placed the tray on the table, bowed her head slightly, and left the room. The sound of their laughter followed her up the stairs, like hounds. In the mirror of her bedroom, Amara searched her own reflection. She saw the lines of exhaustion, the body that had carried not just her pain, but also her loyalty. She whispered to herself, "Is this who I have become?" A shadow in my own home that night, as Kola boasted downstairs, Amara made a decision. For years, she had lived for him, molding herself into what she thought he needed. But something shifted in her spirit. She would not change for Kola's approval anymore. She would change for herself. The next morning, she woke before the Sunday. The city of Lagos was still yawning awake, the air damp with dew, and the distant call of hawkers preparing their stalls. Amara tied her hair in a scarf, slipped on old sneakers, and stepped outside. She began with a walk down the quiet streets, then a jog, her breath sharp against the humid dawn. She pushed past the ache in her legs, the pounding of her heart. Each step whispered a declaration, "I am enough. I will rise." Day by day, she built new habits. Yoga classes, fitness sessions, healthy meals cooked with purpose instead of comfort. She attended workshops for women seeking empowerment, sat with strangers who shared their own scars, and learned that she was not alone. Slowly, the woman in the mirror began to change, not just her shape, but her gaze. Her eyes regained a spark, her posture a strength. She was reclaiming herself piece by piece. Meanwhile, Kola barely noticed. He was too wrapped up in the glittering parties, the endless applause of Lagos high society. To him, Amara was still the accessory he dragged to events, an ornament to fill the empty seat beside him. But when he did glance at her, he saw something that unsettled him, a calm confidence, a silence that was no longer submissive but deliberate. He shrugged it off, too arrogant to imagine she might be transforming beyond his grasp. Weeks later, Amara stood before her mirror in a fitted dress she had once been afraid to wear. Her body was firmer, her face glowing, her smile carrying something deeper than beauty, dignity. When Kola entered the room, his eyes widened slightly. Well, he said, his lips curling in that familiar smirk. I see those workouts are finally paying off. You don't look half as bad anymore. Amara turned her gaze from the mirror to him. For the first time in years, she did not shrink under his words. Her voice was steady, her tone calm. You mistake me, Kola. I didn't do this for you. I did this for me. For the woman you stopped seeing. He chuckled, waving her off as though she were a child throwing a tantrum. But deep in his chest, something shifted, a discomfort he couldn't name. Amara's eyes no longer pleaded for his approval. They burned with a light that seemed untouchable. He had no idea that the days of mocking her without consequence were over. Outside, the city roared, with life buses honking, traders shouting, children laughing. Lagos moved forward with or without the pride of its men. And inside the mansion, Amara felt something she had not felt in years, freedom beginning to bloom. That night, she opened her journal and wrote in neat, steady handwriting, I will not be defined by the weight of his words, nor by the size of my body. I am Amara, daughter of strength, and my story is only beginning. She closed the book, her heart lighter. The storm was not over. No, it was only rising, but for the first time, she was ready to face it. The morning sun crept slowly through the curtains of the mansion, painting golden lines across the marble floor. Amara rose earlier than usual, her body sore, but alive, the ache in her muscles reminding her that change was not comfortable but necessary. She moved through the house quietly, her steps light, deliberate, as though she had already begun walking into a new destiny. Downstairs, Kola was sprawled across the velvet sofa, scrolling through his phone, his laughter rumbling as he shared memes with a group chat of wealthy acquaintances. He barely noticed his wife's presence as she carried a tray of fruit for herself. So he muttered without looking up, You're on this fitness nonsense again. Don't expect miracles. Some people aren't meant to be slim. Amara paused, her hand steady, as she set down her plate. In the past, words like that would have cut deep, igniting a night of silent tears. But now she allowed the insult to wash over her like water against stone. She smiled faintly and replied, This isn't about being slim, Kola. It's about being alive. She left him stunned, not by the sharpness of her words, but by the serenity in her tone. He had always expected her to defend, to plead, to break. But this Amara did neither. She simply walked away. Later that afternoon, Kola hosted another of his frequent gatherings. The living room buzzed with chatter, glasses clinking as the wealthy elite of Lagos mingled in designer clothes. Amara descended the stairs gracefully, her presence calm yet commanding. The conversations lulled briefly, as heads turned. Her posture radiated confidence, her skin glowing from weeks of self-care. Kola's eyes narrowed, uncertain whether to feel pride or irritation. Here comes my wife, he announced loudly, his voice dripping with sarcasm. Finally decided to grace us with her healthier self. Laughter rippled through the room, though it was forced, uneasy. Many guests exchanged glances, sensing the cruelty beneath the jest. But Amara did not flinch. She smiled politely, greeted the guests warmly, and sat at the piano in the corner. Without warning, her fingers danced across the keys, filling the room with a soulful Yoruba hymn her grandmother had taught her, Marluabi or Mar Tia Ki Ta Lor Yoja. A child of good character is never sold in the market. The room fell silent, her voice strong and clear, as she sang the ancient lines. Even those unfamiliar with the language felt the weight of its truth. Kola shifted uncomfortably, suddenly aware that the spotlight he loved so much was no longer his. It was hers. That evening, after the guests had left, he confronted her. What was that performance for? Are you trying to embarrass me in my own house? His words were sharp, but Amara looked at him steadily, her calm gaze unsettling him more than any anger could. I wasn't performing for them, Kola, she said softly. I was reminding myself who I am. For the first time in years, Kola had no retort. He stormed off, slamming the door to his study, but her words lingered in his mind like an unwelcome echo. Over the following weeks, Amara's transformation deepened. She not only worked on her body, but also began to invest her time into learning. She attended seminars on entrepreneurship, joined a network of women, business leaders, and enrolled in online courses about wellness and mental health. She took careful notes, asked questions, and stayed up late, studying long after Kola had fallen asleep. It wasn't long before she stumbled upon an idea that ignited her spirit, a wellness program tailored for women who had been overlooked, mocked, or broken down by life's harshness. She wanted to create a space where women could rebuild not just their bodies but their confidence, their identities. One Saturday morning, she confided in her childhood friend Ngozi over coffee at a small cafe near Lekki. Ngozi, vibrant and outspoken, clapped her hands with excitement. "Amara, this is brilliant. Women need this. And you, of all people, are the one to lead it. You've lived it. You've survived it." Amara smiled, her heart swelling with a mixture of fear and determination. "But Kola will never support it. He thinks anything outside his empire is a waste of time." Ngozi leaned forward, her voice firm. "Then don't do it for his support. Do it for yourself. Do it for every woman who cried in silence the way you once did." That evening, as Amara prepared dinner, Kola strolled into the kitchen, his phone pressed to his ear. He barely acknowledged her presence, too busy boasting to a business partner about a new contract. When he finally hung up, he glanced at the table. "Still cooking. With all the staff we have, why bother?" he mocked. Amara placed the spoon down gently. "Because it grounds me. Because it reminds me that life is more than deals and dollars." Kola rolled his eyes. "Spare me the motivational speeches. If you really want to impress me, lose more weight and look presentable at the gala next month." Something inside Amara clicked. She didn't raise her voice, but her words cut deeper than any scream could have. "I will attend the gala, Kola, but I will not be there to impress you. I will be there as myself, and you will no longer decide what that means." Kola froze, startled by the steel in her tone. He tried to laugh it off, but the sound was hollow. 2 weeks later, the gala arrived. The ballroom sparkled with chandeliers, the air heavy with the perfume of the wealthy. Kola entered with his usual swagger, but when Amara stepped out of the car beside him, conversation stopped mid-sentence. She wore a fitted emerald gown that hugged her new figure, her natural hair, styled into a regal crown, her smile radiant but untouchable. Photographers rushed forward, cameras flashing as they captured her transformation. For the first time, Kola felt invisible beside her. Reporters whispered her name, not his. Influential women approached her, praising her elegance, asking about her secrets. One journalist, microphone in hand, asked Mrs. Amara, "What's your inspiration behind this incredible transformation?" She paused, her eyes sweeping the room before landing on the camera. Her voice was clear, firm. "My inspiration, myself. For years I lived to be enough for others. Now I live to be enough for me. And every woman deserves the same." The applause was deafening. Kola's jaw tightened, his pride stinging. He forced a smile for the cameras, but inside he was raging. His wife, whom he had belittled for years, was now commanding the very stage he thought belonged only to him. That night, back in the mansion, Kola confronted her again. "Do you enjoy humiliating me, standing there like some queen, as if you built this life?" Amara's calm gaze cut through his fury. "I may not have built your empire, Kola, but I built myself, and that is a kingdom you cannot control." Her words were a thunderclap, shaking the very foundation of his arrogance. He stormed out, slamming the door, but in his silence lay the beginning of his unraveling. For Amara, however, the night was a beginning of something else, freedom blooming in full color. She had found her voice and the world was finally listening. And deep inside, she knew this was only the start of a revolution far greater than her husband could ever imagine. The gala had been a turning point, but it was only the beginning of a deeper storm. In the weeks that followed, Amara's face appeared in lifestyle magazines and online blogs. Her transformation became a symbol, her words replayed on social media. "I live to be enough for me." Women across Lagos quoted it like scripture. She was invited to sit on panels about self-love and empowerment, her phone buzzing with requests for interviews. Kola, meanwhile, found himself drowning in a strange silence. His colleagues no longer praised him without restraint. Instead, they spoke with admiration about Amara. At the country club, men slapped his back with half-jokes that cut deeper than they intended. "Your wife's the real star now, eh, Kola? Don't let her outshine you." He laughed with them, but each word lodged like a thorn in his pride. At home, Amara's new routines continued. She woke early for her morning run, joined fitness classes, then spent hours at her laptop researching wellness programs. She began mapping out a plan, an initiative to support women who had lost themselves in marriages, motherhood, or careers that crushed their spirits. She envisioned gyms not just as places for exercise, but as sanctuaries where women could rebuild their confidence. One evening, she sat with her notepad at the kitchen table, sketching ideas when Kola entered. His voice was sharp, his tie loosened from a long day of meetings. What is this obsession you have lately? Running meetings, scribbling like a schoolgirl. Don't forget you're my wife. Your place is here, not chasing foolish hobbies. Amara looked up, her eyes steady. It's not a hobby, Cola. It's a vision, and it's mine. He scoffed, pouring himself a glass of whiskey. Vision, don't make me laugh. Without me, you'd still be selling groundnuts on a street corner. The words stung, but this time she refused to shrink. And without me, you would never have survived those early years, she replied quietly. You've forgotten who prayed with you when the banks refused you loans, who fed you when you couldn't afford dinner. Don't mistake your empire for your own strength alone. His hand froze on the glass. He wasn't used to her talking back. Anger rose in his chest, but when he looked into her eyes, he saw something unshakable. She no longer feared him. He muttered a curse under his breath and stormed out of the room. Days turned into weeks, and the cracks in their marriage widened. Cola's arrogance was a crumbling mask, though he refused to admit it. At business meetings, he found himself distracted, his mind haunted by the sight of Amara, standing confident at the gala, her voice echoing in his ears. Meanwhile, Amara grew more radiant, her purpose clearer each day. With Ngozi's help, she launched her first pilot program, a weekend retreat for women called Rise Again. Held in a modest hall in Surulere, it offered yoga group counseling and talks about self-worth. To Amara's surprise, the hall filled beyond capacity. Women from all walks of life, traders, bankers, single mothers, even widows came seeking strength. Many wept as they shared their stories of humiliation and despair. Amara listened, embraced them, and spoke with a quiet authority that made her words sink deep. You are not defined by the cruelty of others, she told them. You are defined by the strength you find within. If I can rise again, so can you. The applause was thunderous, and that night Amara cried not from pain, but from gratitude. She had found her calling. But success has a way of stirring storms. News of the retreat reached Cola through a friend. At first he laughed bitterly. My wife playing pastor for broken women, let her waste her time. But when photos of the retreat appeared online and when her words were quoted in newspapers, his laughter turned to rage. One night he confronted her in their bedroom. You're making me look weak. Do you understand that people are whispering that my wife is leading some kind of rebellion against men, against me? Amara calmly closed her journal. This isn't about you, Cola. It never was. It's about women finding their strength. Strength, he snapped. You're embarrassing me. You think Lagos society respects a man whose wife parades herself as some savior? Amara's voice sharpened, though she did not raise it. Respect is not built on how people see you, Cola. It is built on how you treat the people closest to you. And you've lost that long ago. His hand trembled on the doorknob, his fury battling with fear. For the first time in his life, he realized he was losing control of something he had always believed was his. By right, his wife's silence. The following month, Amara's initiative grew faster than she imagined. Donations poured in from women in the diaspora inspired by her story. She was invited to speak on radio shows and appeared on TV as a guest, her message spreading like fire. Meanwhile, Cola's empire began to show cracks. A major deal slipped through his fingers, his investors questioning his leadership. Rumors swirled that he was too distracted, that his pride was interfering with his business sense. For the first time in years, he felt vulnerable, and he despised it. At a lavish party thrown by one of his business partners, Cola tried to reassert his dominance. Dressed in a sleek suit, he introduced Amara to the guests as though nothing had changed. But when a prominent journalist approached her for an interview, Cola interrupted, forcing her aside with a tight smile. She's just my wife, he said. Ask me about real matters. The insult was public cutting, but this time Amara didn't hide. She turned to the journalist and said clearly, I am more than just his wife. I am Amara, and I have my own story to tell. The crowd buzzed with whispers. Cameras flashed. Cola's smile froze his world, crumbling inch by inch. That night back at the mansion, the silence between them was deafening. Finally, Amara spoke. Cola, I will not live in your shadow anymore. You've mocked me, humiliated me, and tried to silence me. But those days are over. If you cannot respect me, then you do not deserve me. He stared at her, his pride and desperation clashing. Are you threatening me with divorce? Her answer was calm, unshaken. I'm not threatening you. I'm warning you. I will not stay where love has turned to chains. For once, Cola had no words. He watched her walk away, the emerald of her gown trailing like a banner of victory. And deep inside, he felt the first sharp sting of fear, not of losing her body, but of losing her forever. Because for the first time in their marriage, he realized Amara no longer belonged to him. She belonged to herself. The days that followed were heavy with tension. as though the mansion itself had learned to hold its breath. Once its polished marble and glittering chandeliers had been symbols of Cola's triumph, but now they felt more like mirrors reflecting his growing emptiness. The man who had always prided himself on being in control was beginning to feel powerless in his own home. Amara, however, seemed lighter than ever. Each morning she slipped into her sneakers before dawn and disappeared into the cool Lagos air. She would return hours later energized, humming Yoruba hymns as she prepared her breakfast of papaya and tea. She smiled more, laughed often on the phone with Ngozi, and filled her evenings with reading and planning. The woman who once sat quietly in the corner of Cola's parties had now become someone who drew people in without trying. One evening, Amara received a message that would change everything, an invitation to speak at a women's empowerment summit in Abuja. Her words from the retreat had reached organizers across the country, and they wanted her to share her story on a national stage. Tears pricked her eyes as she read the email. It was an opportunity she had never dreamed of, a chance to show countless women that they could rise from the ashes of mockery and pain. That night, she told Kola at dinner. His fork clattered against the plate. "Abuja, a summit. Amara, don't embarrass me. What do you even know about empowerment? You'll go there and make me look like a failure airing our dirty laundry." Amara set her fork down, her voice steady. "It's not about you, Kola. It's about hope. It's about women who need to know they are not alone." He slammed his fist on the table, making the cutlery jump. "You are my wife. You live under my roof. Do you think you can defy me?" For the first time in years, Amara did not flinch. "I live under this roof, yes, but my spirit belongs to God and to myself. I will go." His face darkened, but the fire in her eyes made him hesitate. He muttered curses under his breath and stormed out, leaving her at the table. But deep inside, Kola knew something terrifying. He could no longer bend her will. The weeks leading up to the summit were electric. Amara worked tirelessly, drafting her speech and practicing in front of a small group of supporters. Ngozi cheered her on, while other women from the retreat offered testimonies that strengthened her resolve. She poured her soul into her words, determined to deliver not just a speech, but a lifeline. Meanwhile, Kola's empire began to wobble. A major investor pulled out of a project after rumors spread about his domestic troubles. Competitors smelled weakness circling like sharks. He tried to drown his unease in lavish parties, expensive cars, and endless bottles of whiskey, but the laughter of his friends now felt hollow. Even they had begun to whisper about Amara's rise. One night, Kola overheard two of his so-called friends at the club. "Have you seen Kola's wife lately?" one said with a chuckle. "She's more famous than him now." "The irony," the other replied. "He mocked her for years, and now she's the one the world listens to." Kola's jaw clenched, humiliation burning through him. He left the club early, the words echoing like knives. The day of the summit arrived. The hall in Abuja was grand, filled with women from every corner of the country, entrepreneurs, students, mothers, widows. The air buzzed with anticipation. When Amara stepped onto the stage dressed in a flowing Ankara gown with bold patterns of green and gold, the crowd erupted in applause. She took a deep breath, her hands steady on the podium. For many years she began, "I believed my worth depended on someone else's approval. I thought if I gave enough, sacrificed enough, endured enough, I would be valued. But instead, I was mocked, belittled, and made to feel small." The room was silent, every ear straining to catch her words. "I stand before you not as a victim, but as a woman who chose to rise. I chose to look in the mirror and say, Amara, you are enough. Not because of my weight, not because of my beauty, not because of wealth or status, but because I am a child of God and my dignity is not for sale." Tears rolled down faces in the crowd. Women nodded, some clutching each other's hands. "My sisters," Amara continued, her voice swelling, "do not wait for permission to live. Do not allow anyone to tell you that you are less than you are. Your worth is written in your very breath. Rise again for yourself, for your daughters, for generations yet to come." The applause was thunderous, echoing through the hall like a wave. Amara bowed her head, overwhelmed by the standing ovation. In that moment, she knew her life had changed forever. Back in Lagos, Kola watched the summit on television. His jaw tightened as he saw his wife standing before thousands, cheered like a queen. The pride in the crowd, the media headlines, the viral clips flooding social media, all of it felt like salt on a wound. But beneath his rage was something he hadn't felt in years: fear. Fear that she no longer needed him. Fear that the world had shifted and he was no longer the center of it. That night, he confronted her when she returned home. "So now you're a celebrity. You think you can build a life without me. Do you think these women will protect you when the world turns its back?" Amara placed her bag down gently, her calmness cutting through his fury. I don't need protection, Kola. I have strength, and I will never let anyone silence me again. His voice rose, desperate now. You'll regret this, Amara. You'll regret defying me. She looked at him, her gaze steady, unshaken. No, Kola. The only regret would be staying in a place where love has died, and I am done living in regret. The following week, Amara made a decision that shook the foundation of their marriage. She visited a lawyer in Ikoyi and began the process of filing for separation. When the papers were delivered to Kola, he felt the ground slip beneath his feet. For years, he had believed that money, power, and fear would bind her to him. But now, as he stared at the documents, he realized the truth: Amara had broken free. He tried everything: lavish gifts, promises of change, even begging. But Amara's resolve was unshakable. She no longer wanted apologies wrapped in arrogance. She wanted respect, dignity, peace, and she had finally learned she could have all three without him. And so the war within Kola began. Not a war against Amara, but against himself, the man who had mocked the very woman who was now teaching the world what it meant to rise. For the first time in his life, Kola felt powerless, and it terrified him. The news of Amara's separation filing spread quickly like dry Harmattan fire across Lagos society. Within days, whispers turned into headlines. Blogs carried pictures of her leaving the lawyer's office with her head held high, and the stories praised her as a woman of courage who had broken free from years of humiliation. Hashtags trended: number rise with Amara and number enough is enough. For Kola, it was a nightmare unraveling in broad daylight. The man once admired as untouchable now found his name tied to scandal. Investors began to hesitate. Partners delayed meetings. His empire built on image as much as profit shook under the weight of bad press. At the club where he once held court conversations stopped when he entered. Friends avoided his gaze, embarrassed to be associated with a man who had mocked the very woman the world now adored. But the sting was sharper at home. The mansion that had once been his fortress now felt like a prison. Every corner reminded him of Amara, her laughter, her quiet prayers, the meals she once cooked. And yet the very woman who filled those memories was now a storm he could not contain. One night, unable to sleep, Kola wandered through the dark hallways until he found himself outside her empty studio room. On the table lay her journal, stacks of notes, speeches written in her neat, careful handwriting. Curiosity overcame his pride, and he opened one. The first words he read pierced his chest. One day he will understand that I was never weak. I was only silent. And silence is not surrender, it is strength waiting to speak. Kola closed the journal, his hands trembling. For the first time in years, he felt small. Meanwhile, Amara's life blossomed. With Ngozi's support, she expanded her Rise Again initiative into a full foundation. Women across Nigeria donated, volunteered, and spread the word. She organized weekly workshops in communities where women had no voice, offering them not only fitness training but also mentorship and business skills. She spoke at schools, telling young girls that their worth could never be measured by the opinions of others. Her story became national news. One evening, she appeared on a primetime television program, her calm presence captivating the audience. Mrs. Amara, the host, asked, "What do you say to women still trapped in marriages where they are mocked, diminished, or silenced?" Amara took a breath, her eyes steady on the camera. "I say your silence is not weakness. You are not broken. You are waiting for the right moment to rise, and when you do, the world will know your strength. You owe it to yourself to live fully, not as a shadow, but as a light." The applause in the studio was thunderous, and across the country, countless women wept in their living rooms, finding courage in her words. Kola watched that broadcast alone. Whiskey glass in hand, he sat in the dark, staring at the screen. His chest tightened as he realized something devastating. He had spent years mocking the very woman who now carried a nation on her shoulders. And worse, he had pushed her away until there was no road back. In desperation, he reached out to her the next morning. She was at her new office, a modest building, painted in bright colors, buzzing with women working on laptops, phones, and fitness mats. When she saw his name flash on her phone, she hesitated, then answered. "Kola," she said flatly. "Amara," his voice cracked. "Please, can we talk? Just talk." Her silence stretched before she replied. "You had years to talk. You chose to mock instead." "I know," he said, his tone raw, "but I'm losing everything. The business, my respect, and you. I need you." Her reply was calm, almost gentle. "You don't need me, Kola. You need to face yourself. Until you do, no one can save you. Not even me." She ended the call. Kola stared at the phone, his pride shattered. For a man who once believed money could buy anything, it was a lesson colder than any storm. Some things could never be bought back. But Kola was not ready to surrender. That weekend he showed up at one of Amara's community events unannounced. The women gasped when they saw him, their whispers sharp with judgment. Amara, standing at the front, stiffened but did not waver. "Kola," she said into the microphone, her tone steady. "Why are you here?" He cleared his throat, all eyes on him. I came to listen." The women laughed bitterly, some shaking their heads. But Amara held up her hand, silencing them. She gestured to a seat at the back. "Then sit and listen." For the next 2 hours, Kola listened as women shared stories of husbands who mocked their bodies, of fathers who dismissed their dreams, of brothers who silenced their voices. Each testimony was a dagger in his chest, for he saw himself in their stories. And when Amara spoke at the end, her words struck him hardest. "For years I thought love meant enduring cruelty in silence. But love is not cruelty. Love is respect. And the day you accept less, you lose yourself. Never again." Kola lowered his head, shame flooding him. That night, as rain pattered against the mansion windows, Kola sat in his study staring at the divorce papers on his desk. His empire was slipping, his pride in ruins, and the woman he once belittled was stronger than ever. For hours he wrestled with himself, the silence pressing down on him. Finally, he picked up a pen. His hand shook, but he signed. Not because he wanted to let her go, but because he finally understood he no longer had the right to hold her. As he laid the pen down, a strange peace washed over him. For the first time in years, Kola admitted the truth: he was the architect of his own downfall. When Amara received the signed documents, she sat quietly in her office, her heart heavy yet light, heavy for the years lost, light for the future ahead. She whispered a prayer of gratitude, not for the end of her marriage, but for the beginning of her freedom. That evening, she addressed her growing team of women. "This is not just my story, it is ours. Every step we take is proof that dignity can rise from ashes. Let us keep building, not for revenge, but for healing." The women clapped, their voices echoing with unity. And as Amara looked around the room, she knew one thing with certainty. She had not only freed herself, she had ignited a fire that could never be extinguished. And somewhere across the city, in a mansion that now felt emptier than ever, Kola sat in the silence he once demanded, realizing too late that silence was all he had left. The ink on the divorce papers was barely dry when Lagos society erupted with chatter. Social media buzzed with photos of Amara smiling beside women she had empowered, while Kola was seen alone, stepping out of his Bentley with a face carved in stone. To the world, the contrast was striking, one rising, the other crumbling. For Kola, the silence in his mansion had become unbearable. The once busy halls echoed with ghosts of laughter he had crushed, dinners he had mocked, and gentle words he had dismissed. Even the staff moved quietly around him now, their eyes avoiding his. Respect had turned into pity, and pity for a man like Kola was poison. One evening, his old friend Oba dropped by. He carried a bottle of cognac and the forced cheer of someone who didn't want to admit what everyone already knew. My brother Oba began cautiously pouring drinks. "These stories about Amara, they're everywhere. She's become powerful." Kola's jaw tightened. "She was my wife. My name gave her that platform." Oba shook his head slowly. "No, Kola. She gave herself that platform. And the truth, people respect her more than they respect you now. If you don't change, you'll lose more than her, you'll lose yourself." The words stung, but Kola laughed bitterly. "Change. At my age, I built empires, Oba. I don't bend to anyone." Yet when Oba left, the laughter died in his throat. Alone, staring at the bottom of his glass, Kola realized something terrifying. He had already lost everything that truly mattered. Amara, on the other hand, was thriving. Her Rise Again Foundation had grown into a nationwide movement. She partnered with local NGOs, launched wellness centers in 3 states, and was invited to speak at universities. Young women followed her on social media, calling her Auntie Amara, the Phoenix. She had become more than a figurehead, she was a beacon. One Saturday morning, she traveled to Ibadan to meet with rural women who rarely had access to empowerment programs. In a small community hall, she listened to stories of abuse, silence, and despair. One woman, her voice trembling, said, "My husband calls me useless every day. I thought I was nothing until I heard your story. You gave me courage to speak." Amara took her hands, looking her in the eyes. "You are not useless, you are priceless, and your voice matters." The room erupted in applause, tears streaming down faces. In that moment, Amara knew the pain she had endured was no longer a burden, it was a weapon of healing. But as her star rose, Kola's empire stumbled. Deals collapsed, his board questioned his judgment, and whispers spread that he was distracted. For the first time, he found himself on the defensive in boardrooms where he once commanded fear. At a high-profile meeting, an investor bluntly asked Kola, "Are you truly fit to lead? Your personal scandals are overshadowing your business. People don't trust a man who cannot respect his own wife." The words were daggers. Kola clenched his fists under the table, his pride burning. But deep down, he knew the investor was right. That night, he sat in his study surrounded by financial reports, yet his mind was elsewhere. He thought of the times Amara had sat across from him in that same room praying quietly while he planned deals. He had dismissed her as irrelevant, yet now her voice commanded more respect than his wealth ever had. He buried his face in his hands. The truth-suffocating arrogance had cost him not just love, but legacy. Weeks later, Lagos buzzed with excitement over a grand charity event hosted by the First Lady. Amara had been invited as a guest of honor, while Kola was included only because of his past reputation. For the first time, they would appear publicly in the same room since the separation. When Amara arrived dressed in a flowing blue lace gown that shimmered under the chandeliers, the hall turned into a wave of admiration. Cameras flashed, reporters swarmed. She greeted dignitaries with grace, her aura radiant. Kola entered moments later. He wore his finest agbada, his chin lifted high, but the whispers around him cut like knives. There he is, the man who mocked his queen. As fate would have it, they found themselves face to face near the center of the hall. The crowd hushed, waiting. Kola's chest tightened as he looked at her. She was more breathtaking than ever, but what shook him most was the serenity in her eyes, calm, confident, unbothered. "Amra," he said, his voice low, almost pleading. She gave him a polite nod. "Kola, I signed the papers," he stammered. "But I didn't sign away my regret." Her eyes softened, but only slightly. "Regret is yours to carry, not mine. I've laid mine down." He wanted to say more, to beg, but before he could, a crowd of women approached her, eager to speak. Amara turned away gracefully, leaving him standing alone, surrounded by whispers. Back at the mansion that night, Kola wandered aimlessly. He sat at the piano Amara once played the notes, now trapped in silence. For the first time, tears filled his eyes, not from anger, but from grief. He had mocked love until it left him, and now all his wealth felt like sand slipping through his hands. He whispered into the emptiness, "Amara, forgive me." But the walls gave no answer. Meanwhile, Amara ended her night differently. Surrounded by her team, she laughed, shared plans for a new initiative, and looked forward with hope. Yet in the quiet of her heart, she said a prayer, not for herself, but for Kola. God, teach him what wealth cannot. Teach him humility. Teach him peace. She no longer carried anger, only clarity. Her journey was no longer about proving him wrong. It was about proving herself right. And that realization was freedom. The following morning, newspapers carried two pictures side by side. On the left, Kola alone in his mansion, his empire trembling. On the right, Amara, surrounded by women, her face glowing with purpose. The caption read, "Two lives, one story. One mocked love and lost it. The other embraced pain and found power." And so the world began to learn what Kola had learned too late. A man may build empires with money, but a woman who rises in dignity builds legacies that outlive kingdoms. The city of Lagos had grown accustomed to Amara's name, appearing in headlines not as an appendage to her former husband's wealth, but as a beacon of empowerment. Billboards showcased her. Wellness Foundation magazines named her among the top 100 women transforming Africa, and invitations poured in from governments and international organizations. For Amara, this was not about fame. It was about using her voice, once silenced, to build bridges for women who had none. But for Kola, each headline was another nail in the coffin of his pride. The man who once filled boardrooms with thunder now found himself sitting alone at the far end of tables. His empire was shrinking. Clients were pulling away, citing his damaged reputation. Shareholders whispered about replacing him as CEO. Yet what unsettled him most wasn't the potential loss of his empire. It was the sight of Amara standing strong where he had once torn her down. One Friday evening, Kola drove past a community center newly built under Amara's foundation. Women were streaming out after a seminar, their laughter filling the air. A banner hung above the gate, "Rise Again, where women find their voices." He stopped his car, staring. For the first time in years, he felt the weight of loneliness press so heavily he could barely breathe. Inside the center, Amara had just finished addressing a group of young girls. She spoke of dignity, of self-worth, of courage. As she packed her notes, Ngozi teased her. You know, Amara, you've become larger than life. Even the men who mocked us now send their wives here in secret. Amara smiled faintly. Let them come. This is not about revenge. It's about freedom. That weekend, Kola's empire faced its worst blow yet. A scandal broke involving mismanagement in one of his companies. Investors panicked, and by Monday morning, news stations declared billionaire Kola Adeyemi's fortune on the brink. Desperate Kola called Oba his oldest friend. Oba, I'm losing everything. The board is against me. I need help. Oba's sigh was heavy. Kola, the truth is you're reaping what you sowed. You built your empire on fear and arrogance. People followed you because of power, not respect. But now respect is what you need most, and you have none left. Kola's voice cracked. Then what do I do? Start by admitting your wrongs, Oba replied. Not to the board, not to the world, to Amara. She is the key to your redemption, even if she never comes back. The thought burned Kola's pride like acid. Apologize to the woman he had mocked for years, yet deep inside he knew Oba was right. 2 days later, Kola showed up at Amara's office. He was thinner than before, his agbada loose on his shoulders, his eyes sunken from sleepless nights. When Amara saw him standing at the door, she froze. Her team looked uneasy, but she raised her hand, signaling them to leave the room. Kola, she said quietly. He stepped forward, his voice low. Amara, I know I have no right to stand here, but I need to say this. I destroyed us. I mocked you when you needed love. I humiliated you when you needed support. And now, I am nothing without you. Amara studied him carefully. For once his arrogance was gone. He looked like a man stripped bare. You're wrong, Kola, she replied softly. You are not nothing without me. You are nothing because you refuse to see anyone beyond yourself. Your fall is not my doing, it is yours. Tears welled in his eyes, surprising even him. Then teach me. Help me find who I was meant to be. Amara shook her head. It's not my role anymore. Redemption is not something I can hand you. It's something you must seek within yourself. Her words hit him like thunder. He dropped his gaze, nodding slowly. Then at least let me say this. I am sorry. Not for losing you, but for breaking you when you were the one who built me. Amara's throat tightened, but she held her composure. I was never broken, Kola. I was only hidden. And now I am free. With that, she dismissed him gently. He walked out into the scorching Lagos sun, the world suddenly brighter and harsher than before. Weeks passed and Kola began a quiet transformation. He cut back on lavish parties, sold several luxury cars, and started spending evenings volunteering at small community projects, something no one expected from him. At first, people thought it was a publicity stunt, but as weeks turned to months, they saw the change was real. He listened more, spoke less. He donated anonymously to Amara's foundation, never attaching his name. Still, despite his efforts, Amara remained distant. She focused on her mission, traveling across Nigeria, speaking at conferences, and expanding her programs. Yet sometimes when she heard whispers of Kola serving soup at a shelter or mentoring young entrepreneurs, her heart softened slightly. Not because she wanted him back, but because she knew change even in him was possible. The climax came one rainy evening when both Amara and Kola were invited to a televised panel on redefining strength in modern Africa. Neither knew the other had been invited until they arrived. The host introduced Amara first. She walked onto the stage to roaring applause, her poise regal. Then Kola was introduced. The audience murmured, some even booed. He bowed his head humbly, accepting the disdain without protest. During the discussion, Amara spoke with clarity about dignity and resilience. When the host turned to Kola, the room grew tense. All eyes waited to hear if he would defend himself or deflect blame. Instead, he said quietly, once I believed strength meant dominance. I mocked the woman who gave me love, thinking arrogance was power. But today I know strength is humility. And the woman I mocked, Amara, is the reason I understand this truth. If you must respect anyone tonight, do not respect me. Respect her. The room fell silent. Then applause erupted, not for Kola, but for his words about Amara. She looked at him, her expression unreadable, but deep in her heart she knew something was different. This was not the man who once sneered at her in parties. This was a man finally stripped of pride. After the panel, Kola approached her backstage. He did not beg. He simply said, I don't expect forgiveness. I only hope to live the rest of my life, proving that I've changed. Amara nodded. Then live it well, Kola. Not for me, for yourself. They parted ways not as lovers, not even as friends, but as two souls who had walked through fire and emerged differently. That night, Amara stood by her window, watching the rain wash over Lagos. She felt a peace she hadn't known in years. She whispered a quiet prayer, not for the past, but for the future. And in another part of the city, Kola knelt by his bed, something he had not done in decades, and prayed the same. They were no longer bound by chains of mockery and silence. They were free separately, but finally free. Months passed like the ebb and flow of the Atlantic tide, reshaping everything in its path. Amara's life blossomed into a rhythm she had long dreamed of, but never thought possible. Her foundation had expanded across multiple states, offering not just wellness programs, but scholarships, small business grants, and mentorship for women who had endured abuse or abandonment. Her name had become synonymous with courage, and though the weight of her past lingered like a faint scar, it no longer held her captive. Every morning she rose before the sun, prayed, and wrote in her journal her anchor of clarity. One morning, as she sipped tea in her office overlooking bustling Lagos streets, her assistant rushed in with a broad smile. "Madam, the UN Women's Council has officially invited you to speak at their global summit in Nairobi. They want you to share your journey." Amara's hands trembled slightly as she accepted the letter. She had once been mocked for her body, silenced by insults, trapped in shame. Now the world wanted her story. She whispered half to herself, half to the God who had carried her, "This is more than me. This is for every woman who thought she was not enough." Meanwhile, Kola lived a life no one would have imagined for him a year earlier. Gone were the roaring parties, the fleets of exotic cars, the endless champagne nights. He now spent mornings visiting orphanages, afternoons mentoring, struggling entrepreneurs, and evenings in solitude. His once immaculate suits had been replaced with simple native wares. Neighbors who had feared his sharp tongue now greeted him with cautious respect. But his redemption was not smooth. Many still distrusted him. At shareholder meetings, he faced sneers. At gatherings, whispers followed him. Yet he bore it all quietly. Pride had been stripped away, leaving humility in its place. Sometimes he even joined volunteers cleaning markets in the rain, ignoring the mud that stained his once untouchable image. And though he no longer saw Amara, she was always present in his heart like a compass, pointing him away from arrogance, reminding him of who he must never be again. The day of the Nairobi summit arrived. The grand hall sparkled with world leaders, activists, and journalists from across the globe. Flags from dozens of nations swayed gently above the stage. When Amara's name was announced, the room thundered with applause. She walked gracefully to the podium, her Ankara gown glowing with bold colors. Her voice carried steady but warm. "I stand before you, not as someone who had it easy, but as someone who has known ridicule, pain, and betrayal. I was mocked for my body, silenced for my loyalty, diminished in my own home. But I found strength in the very wounds that tried to bury me. I found power not in wealth, but in dignity." As she spoke, cameras flashed and pens scribbled. Her story pierced through the hall, weaving hope into the hearts of women who watched live, from villages and cities alike. By the end, the audience rose to their feet in a standing ovation. Tears shimmered in eyes and strangers embraced, inspired by her courage. Amara bowed her head humbly. "This victory is not mine alone. It belongs to every woman who dares to reclaim her voice." That night, Kola sat in his modest living room, watching the broadcast on TV. As Amara's image filled the screen, pride and regret twisted inside him like twin blades. He whispered, "She's everything I never saw. Everything I never deserved." For the first time, he didn't feel jealousy or bitterness, just gratitude that she had found her wings. The next morning, he took a quiet step further in his journey. He walked into a church he hadn't entered in 20 years, sat in the back pew, and let his tears fall. He confessed not just his cruelty toward Amara, but the arrogance that had poisoned his soul. When he left, he felt lighter, as though chains had broken. Weeks later, fate crossed their paths once again. Amara had returned from Nairobi and was invited to an exclusive gala celebrating women leaders in Africa. She almost declined, but Ngozi insisted. "You must go, Amara. These events amplify your mission." She agreed reluctantly. The gala was held in a luxury hotel ballroom, glittering with chandeliers. As she walked in, applause rippled. People clamored to greet her, shake her hand, take photos. But then across the room, she saw him. Kola stood quietly in a corner, not as a guest of honor, not surrounded by sycophants, just a man humbly observing. He had been invited by one of the organizers who had noticed his recent philanthropy. His suit was simple, his demeanor calm. Their eyes met. For a moment, the noise of the gala faded. Memories rushed between them, the nights of laughter long ago, the scars of humiliation, the fire of transformation. Yet what lingered was not anger. It was something softer, acknowledgement. Kola walked over slowly, careful not to intrude. "Congratulations, Amara," he said, his voice steady. "You are the woman I never had the wisdom to honor, and the world is better because of you." Amara studied him. His face was leaner, his eyes clearer. This was not the arrogant billionaire who once sneered at her in front of friends. This was a man who had been broken and rebuilt. "Thank you, Kola," she replied. "I see you too, not who you were, but who you're trying to become. I wish you strength on that journey." They did not hug. They did not linger. But in that brief exchange, a bridge of closure formed. Later that night, Amara stood on her balcony under the Lagos stars reflecting. For years, she had carried anger like a heavy stone, but now she felt peace. She realized that forgiveness was not about excusing his cruelty, it was about freeing herself from the prison of the past. And somewhere across the city, Kola sat by his window writing in a journal for the first time. He wrote, "Today I saw Amara not as the woman I lost, but as the mirror of what I must become. My redemption is not to win her back. It is to live in a way that honors the love I once wasted." The two lived separate lives, their paths no longer intertwined by marriage but by lessons. One had risen from ashes to inspire nations, the other had fallen from a throne to find his humanity. And in their different journeys, both had finally found freedom. The dry season descended upon Lagos with a haze of dust and heat, but Amara's spirit burned brighter than the Sunday. Her story had traveled beyond Nigeria's borders. Radio hosts in Ghana spoke her name, Kenyan newspapers praised her, and women in South Africa sent her letters of gratitude. She was no longer just Amara, the woman once mocked in silence. She was now a movement. One crisp Saturday morning, she stood at the groundbreaking ceremony of a new wellness village funded by her foundation. Children sang traditional songs, drummers filled the air with rhythm, and elders showered her with blessings. As she placed the first brick on the ground, her hands trembled with reverence. This was no ordinary building, it was a sanctuary where women could heal, learn, and thrive. She whispered under her breath, "For every voice once silenced, let this be a place of freedom." Meanwhile, Kola watched from afar. He had not been invited, but he read about it in the papers. He carried the article folded neatly in his pocket, pulling it out whenever he needed courage. His own life had shifted dramatically. His company's board had forced him to step down as CEO, stripping him of the empire he had once boasted about. For weeks, he felt hollow. But slowly he realized it was a blessing in disguise. Without the weight of prideful leadership, he was free to rebuild, not businesses, but himself. Kola began working with a small nonprofit that mentored young men in inner-city Lagos, teaching them discipline, humility, and respect for women. He told his story openly, confessing his mistakes so others might avoid them. Some laughed, some doubted him, but many listened. In their eyes, he saw flickers of hope, the kind Amara once gave him, the kind he squandered. Their worlds collided again at a national conference on rebuilding family values. Amara was the keynote speaker. Kola had been invited as part of a panel on male mentorship. Neither had known the other would attend until they arrived. When Amara took the stage, her words were like rain in a desert. A home cannot thrive where dignity is absent. A marriage cannot last where mockery takes the place of love. We must teach our sons that true power is not in domination, but in compassion. And we must teach our daughters that their worth is not tied to another's approval, but to the value they carry within. The hall erupted in applause. Amara stood tall, her voice calm but commanding. When she stepped down, Kola rose for his panel. The crowd grew quiet, curious. He spoke slowly, without the charm of a businessman, but with the weight of a man who had seen the edge of ruin. "I once believed money could buy respect. I believed mocking others made me strong. But I was wrong. I mocked the very woman who lifted me when I was nothing, and in doing so, I lost more than wealth, I lost my soul. If you want to be men of value, honor the women who stand beside you. Without them, your empire is dust." The silence that followed was heavy. Some shifted uncomfortably. Others nodded, struck by his candor. Then, unexpectedly, the audience clapped. Not in celebration, but in recognition of truth. Amara, listening from backstage, felt something stir inside her. Not love, not desire, those belonged to another life. What she felt was respect. For the first time in years, Kola's words matched humility. Later that evening, a dinner was held for the conference guests. Amara sat at a long table with ministers and scholars, her laughter mingling with theirs. Across the room, Kola sat alone, sipping water. He made no effort to approach her, no attempt to force a conversation. But as fate would have it, the event's host seated them side by side for dessert. For a while they ate in silence, the clinking of cutlery filling the space between them. Finally, Kola spoke, his voice barely above a whisper. "I don't expect forgiveness. I know I lost that long ago. But Amara, thank you. Thank you for being the mirror I refused to look at until it shattered. Amara placed her fork down gently. She turned to him, her eyes calm. Kola, forgiveness is not mine to withhold. I forgave you the day I chose to live free of your shadow. What you do with your life now, that is between you and God. His eyes glistened. He nodded, words failing him. They finished their meal without another exchange, but something invisible had shifted. For Amara, it was closure. For Kola, it was absolution, not from her lips, but from her composure. As weeks turned into months, both continued their separate journeys. Amara prepared to expand her foundation across West Africa, while Kola poured himself into mentorship, building a small but loyal circle of young men eager to learn from his mistakes. Yet destiny had one more test for them. One humid afternoon, Lagos was rocked by a heavy rainstorm. Streets flooded and chaos rippled across the city. Amara had been scheduled to speak at a community hall in Ajagunle, but the storm caused a roof collapse, trapping dozens inside. She rushed to the scene with her team, determined to help. And there, in the thick of the rescue, she saw him. Kola, drenched to the bone, was carrying children out of the rubble with his bare hands. His expensive past was gone, no suits, no bodyguards. Just a man with mud on his face and determination in his eyes. For hours they worked side by side without speaking. She directed volunteers. He lifted debris with other men. By nightfall, everyone trapped had been rescued. Exhausted, they finally faced each other under the dim light of a street lamp. You didn't have to be here, Amara said softly. And neither did you, Kola replied. But here we are. In that moment, she realized something profound. Perhaps people could change, not for her, not for love reborn, but for themselves, for the world. And Kola, staring at her weary but radiant face, knew he had finally glimpsed the man he should have been all along. They parted ways again that night. No promises, no lingering looks, just a silent understanding that life had brought them full circle, not as lovers, not as enemies, but as two souls who had survived the storm. Back in her home, Amara wrote in her journal, redemption does not always mean reconciliation. Sometimes it means two broken paths finding healing in parallel, and that is enough. And in his small apartment, Kola wrote in his notebook, she was never mine to own, she was always her own light. My task now is to keep others from walking in my shadow. For the first time in years, both slept peacefully, knowing their stories, though once intertwined in pain, had blossomed into freedom. The city was waking to the golden glow of dawn, and Amara found herself standing on the balcony of her foundation's new headquarters. Below, Lagos bustled with its chaotic rhythm hawkers, calling Danfo buses honking, and the hum of people weaving through life. She breathed, deeply grateful for how far she had come. This building, this movement, this freedom, it was the fruit of pain transformed into purpose. In the weeks following the Ajagunle rescue, her reputation had soared to heights she never anticipated. International news channels featured her as the woman who turned pain into power. Donations flooded her foundation, and women from across Africa traveled to Lagos to attend her workshops. The once silenced wife was now a global voice. Yet fame did not seduce Amara. She remained humble, still walking through markets, still sitting with women in small villages, still listening to stories that mirrored her own. She knew her mission was not to shine alone, but to ignite flames in others. On the other side of the city, Kola lived quietly. His apartment was modest, his days filled with service. He no longer measured his worth in contracts or bank accounts. Instead, he mentored young men at the community center, teaching them to respect women, to live with honor, to build not just wealth but character. He told his story often not to gain pity, but to lay bare the dangers of pride. One afternoon, he gathered a group of boys under the shade of a mango tree. A man without humility is a man destined to fall, he told them. Respect the women in your life. They are not trophies, not shadows, but pillars. I lost everything because I forgot that truth. The boys nodded, their eyes wide. For them, he was no longer a billionaire. They saw him as a teacher. Months later, an invitation reached both Amara and Kola, a national award ceremony honoring Nigerians who had contributed to social change. Amara hesitated at first, but her team insisted she attend. Kola, surprised to be included, nearly declined, but his mentor at the community center urged him. This is not about your past. It is about who you are becoming. The event was grand, held at the Eco Convention Center. The hall glittered with chandeliers, and guests adorned in vibrant agbadas and elegant gowns filled the seats. When Amara entered, applause rose like a wave. She was radiant in a flowing blue dress, her confidence undeniable. When Kola entered later, there was silence. At first, memories of his arrogance lingered, but then scattered applause began, soft but genuine. As the ceremony unfolded, names were called, awards presented. Finally, Amara's name echoed through the hall. She walked gracefully to the stage, her acceptance speech simple yet profound. This award is not for me. It is for every woman who was told she was less. It is proof that no insult, no mockery, no betrayal can erase the value God placed within us. The hall erupted in cheers. Then unexpectedly, Cola's name was called. Murmurs rippled through the audience. He walked to the stage slowly, humbled. When he spoke, his voice was steady. I stand here not as the man I was, but as the man I am trying to become. I once destroyed the very love that built me, but today I dedicate my life to teaching young men never to repeat my mistakes. If there is any honor in this award, it belongs to those I failed and to those who gave me a second chance at humanity. The audience fell silent, moved. Then applause grew louder and louder until even those who doubted him rose to their feet. On stage, Amara and Cola stood side by side once more. Their eyes met briefly. There was no bitterness, no longing, only understanding. They had walked through fire and come out refined, not together but whole in their own ways. After the ceremony, they found themselves in the same corridor. For a moment, neither spoke. Then Cola broke the silence. Amara, I may never erase the pain I caused. But I pray that when people hear my story, they will remember you not for what I did to you, but for how you rose despite me. Amara's gaze softened. Cola, your journey is yours. Mine is mine. What matters is that both are no longer defined by shadows. They shook hands, firm, respectful, final. It was not reconciliation of marriage, but reconciliation of souls. Years later, Amara's wellness villages dotted the continent from Ghana to Kenya. She traveled often, her speeches stirring thousands. She remarried eventually, not to a billionaire, but to a kind-hearted professor who cherished her for who she was. Together, they built a home filled with laughter, respect, and faith. Cola never remarried. He devoted his life to service, becoming a father figure to countless young men. His wealth dwindled, but his legacy grew richer. When he died quietly in his sleep many years later, tributes poured in, not about his empire, but about the lives he had touched in redemption. At his memorial, Amara sat in the back row. She did not weep, for she knew he had found peace. Instead, she whispered a prayer of gratitude. Thank you, God, for teaching us both that from brokenness can come beauty, and from pride can come humility. As she left the Lagos, sun broke through the clouds, spilling golden light across the city. It was as if the heavens themselves whispered, every ending births a new beginning. Amara smiled, walking into the future with strength, dignity, and peace. This story is more than a tale of betrayal and revenge. It is a mirror of life's hardest truths. Wealth can buy power, but it cannot buy respect. Pride can build empires, but it can also destroy hearts. Amara's journey shows us that the greatest victory is not in proving others wrong, but in proving yourself worthy of love, dignity, and purpose. And Cola's fall reminds us that arrogance blinds, but humility redeems. Life will always test us with storms, mockery, loss, betrayal, but within every wound lies the seed of transformation. The choice is ours to remain broken or to rise stronger. Dear viewer, may this story remind you to value those who stand by you in silence, to honor love with respect, and to never measure worth by appearances. And if you've ever stumbled, may it remind you that redemption is possible when pride gives way to humility. If this story touched your heart, share your thoughts in the comments. Where are you watching from? What time is it where you are? Don't forget to subscribe so we can continue sharing stories that inspire strength and hope.